There's the voice as always. Okay, good.
All right. Well, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the CATR workshop focusing on conference abstracts. My name is Marlies Schweitzer. I am speaking to you today from Toronto, Toronto, which is part of Treaty 13, and just thrilled to be here to be part of this conversation. And I'm co-leading this session with...
Oh, I'm Jen Stevenson. Hi. I am coming to you from Kingston, Cataraqui, also known as Cataraqui. And these are traditional lands of Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. And I am locked in my daughter's bedroom because it was the only room with a door. It's been a long time since I've had a Zoom set up at home, so this is a bit weird. So hi.
And I don't know if should we ask everyone else to quickly, there aren't too many of you, to introduce yourselves if you're okay, just really briefly. Why don't we start with Kaylin, if you're okay with that?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Kaylin. I'm associate professor at St. Francis Xavier University, and I am joining you from Antigonish, which is located in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and ancestral territory of Mi'kmaq people. And soon I will be seeing you, I hope, in person at Dalhousie. So I'm very excited for the next act or leg of this conference.
Thanks, Kaylin. Why don't we go to Roberta?
Hi, folks. I'm Roberta. I teach at Dalhousie University, where I will hopefully be seeing, I think, potentially everyone on this call in a few days, which we're very excited about. We are in Kjipuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, under the same treaties as Antigonish, the treaties of peace and friendship. And yeah, I'm personally I find writing conference abstracts incredibly hard. And so I'm personally really excited to learn from the conversation at this session.
Now we go to Robin next.
Yeah, I'm Robin Whitaker. I'm president of the Canadian Association for Theatre Research. I'm a professor in the English department at St. Thomas University, which is in the traditional territory of the Wolastoqey and Maliseet. And that's it's about a 4-hour drive. So I'm going to be doing that 4-hour drive in a few days to get to Dalhousie, and I can't wait for that. I've been on the programming committee at CATR this past year, the year before, and many, many times before. So I'm always happy to hear people's views on how to approach abstracts, how to write them, and thinking from the other side of it too, how to assess them too.
Great, thanks, Robin. Katrina, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Katrina Dunn, and I'm in Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation. And I am on my phone in my car, sorry. And I am excited about this because I struggle with abstracts, conference or otherwise. And I'm really looking to hear your advice. So thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. And Bridget, welcome. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am joining you from my parents' basement in Cape Breton, which is in Unamaki, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm very excited to make the drive to Dalhousie from Cape Breton and looking forward to meeting you all there. I'm also doing the social media for the conference. So small plug to say, if anyone has any images that they want to share, please send them along to me or to Taylor, and that would be great, to Taylor Graham. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for that work. That's very important work too. So this is great.
I just want to say Bridget does a really amazing Instagram post as well. So thank you, Bridget. You've been
really does actually. We're
extremely awesome.
Vaulted into the 21st century all of a sudden. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. I was trying hard to make it cool.
Yeah, you are. You're amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we thought we would just start out. Some of you have already shared your sort of your thoughts and feelings on abstracts and the kind of abject terror that it may some of you may feel when you see the call for papers coming out for for a conference that you really want to attend. But just very briefly, my own experiences with abstracts. I've been writing them now, I guess, for over 20 years. First as a graduate student and then as a university professor. And I've tended to go to just a relatively small sampling of conferences. I don't do a lot of wide variety of conferences, but CATR is definitely one of them that I've attended over the years. And so I've written many abstracts for different kinds of, sometimes it's paper panels, sometimes it's been working groups, other formats. So CATR has been a really important place where I've learned a great deal. And then the other conference I regularly attend is the American Society for Theater Research, or ASTR, or ASTR, and that has slightly different conference abstract expectations too. So, and I've also sat on, I'm sitting on the board of a conference organization called Critical Costume, which I think has a very exciting approach to reviewing abstracts. So I hope I'll share some of that today as well. It's actually a conference that gives feedback to everybody who applies on their abstract, which is something I've never experienced before, but so we can maybe talk about that. And I'll just echo the trepidation that I feel sometimes. I think, oh, I don't know that this abstract is any good. So sometimes that feeling doesn't necessarily go away, but I do feel like I have some sense now of what to do and perhaps what not to do from the many years. So that's a little bit about me. Jen, how about you?
Oh gosh, yeah. Okay, that's what are my my life in abstracts. So yeah, I've been writing abstracts for quite a few decades. Again, to various different sources. I think that's something we should talk about. Like, where does the abstract go? Is it an abstract for your book? Is it and at what stage are you writing an abstract for the book? Is it an abstract for an article? Is it an abstract for the article that is complete or in progress? Again, I have experience with both of those genres. I have reviewed and read many abstracts. I'm a former editor of Canadian Theatre Review. I get to say former now, which is awesome. And I've also been, as like Robin, longtime program committee member for CATR. And so I've seen different philosophies over the years, even at CATR, about abstracts, about what they should do, how they're being vetted, how they're being ranked, how they're being kind of feedback we're giving. So that's really been an interesting journey. And maybe the other thing I'll add just generally is I'm a huge fan of writing short. I think there's really great advantages to writing short things. So I often give my students assignments. They're like, write 250 words. And I say to them, and not a penny more. You have to hit that 250 words. And that's an interesting writing challenge. For CTR, I've written lots of those table of contents blurbs, like 35 words. How do you get this out? And very famously, I did have one class where we had, the assignment was tweets. And students had to write tweets. So like I say, I'm a big fan of writing short and getting to the point, getting out. And I think it's a really important craft. And I actually think it's harder to write short than to write long. 10,000 words is actually not, once you get going, is actually not that difficult because you don't need the discipline of writing short. So I think it's a really important skill, regardless of how you're doing it, whether it's an abstract or other kinds of short pieces.
Great, thanks, Jen. So maybe that kind of leads us to one of our first questions that we wanted to cover. And I apologize if you can hear, we've got some neighbors' yard work in the background. So sorry if that disrupts anything. And this comes courtesy of Natalie Alvarez and Rick Knowles, who previously led a workshop on conference abstracts for CATR. And Natalie was unable to be here today, but very generously shared some slides, so we can also perhaps post those at some point. But just as a starting point, their definition, and then maybe we can kind of nuance this with other definitions of conference abstracts. Their definition is, an abstract is a concise description, so to Jen's point about writing short, a concise description of your project's central argument and aims in roughly 250 to 300 words. Think of it as a strong thesis paragraph. So concise description of your project's central argument and aims in roughly 250 to 300 words. Think of it as a strong thesis paragraph. So there's a couple of things already that I want to sort of respond to in that definition. I don't know, but maybe before I do, Jen, is there something there that you'd like to address first?
I think we'll probably get to this, but I think audience is really important. So thinking about that structure, I think is a really good kind of frame. And then thinking about who is going to read this abstract. But even before you get to the reader, I would even say, what is its purpose? And I think that speaks to the structure. Rick and Natalie have framed it as kind of a thesis statement of what you're doing. And I would even get underneath that about like, why does your reader need to know your thesis? What does your reader need to know? What kind of a decision are they making? I mean, is it a decision to accept this paper to a conference or to a journal? Or is it the decision of a reader? Am I going to keep reading? You know, if this is a short blurb and I might keep going. So again, thinking about what you want to communicate to the reader in the abstract, and I think they can be slightly different.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. Who are the reader or readers? Most, I think, programming committees, usually it is a committee. They will, depends on how they are accepting abstracts. But typically it's 2 or 3 people. Sometimes it may be more who are looking at it. We can get to the whole idea of, I don't know if it's still, I don't think it's PC or appropriate anymore to call it double blind or blind review, because I know that's such an ableist language, but the idea that it is often, not always, for conferences, your abstract is being reviewed by a committee who doesn't know who you are. You don't necessarily know who they are until the committee is sort of identified at some point. But in some cases, they may actually know who you are. This can be important if a conference is looking to have a balance in terms of where people are at in their academic careers, and they want to make sure that they're not excluding one group over another. So it might be actually very important to know who you are, but know in advance that you are writing for several people, and having a sense of who those people are, I think is really important. Knowing what is the conference, if it's a conference, like what is the conference? Are you applying to a medical conference? Are you applying to a theater conference? If your work is interdisciplinary, like I know so many people's work is these days, that's wonderful. But you all should also then think carefully about where you want to place your ideas and your argument. And maybe you want to, have an opportunity to meet different academic communities, because you're not sure, like, which one is my home? Where do I really feel most comfortable? So you might be applying to a dance conference, visual art conference, history conference, but know that the expectations are going to be different depending on the discipline or the, even the interdiscipline that you're applying to. Something even like performance studies has its own set of kind of languages and conversations that are happening. So that's an important question. Even before you begin the abstract, is who are you writing for?
I would build on that. I think that's really important. Who are you writing for? So where is it going? What kind of a conference in terms of its discipline? And then that, I think, again, says something about the readers. And, if you're writing for CATR, you can make certain assumptions about what your readers are going to know about the discipline, about some of your context, that you can't always guarantee that. So some calls are going to need different kinds of framing, different kinds of background about assuming what the reader's level of expertise is in your discipline. So for example, okay, now we're going to get maybe into the weeds. Some of the work that I'm doing spans, sometimes it ends up in theater studies, but last year I gave a paper for Canadian Game Studies Association. Well, very, very different audience writing an abstract for game studies, because there's things about just theater that they don't know. What is a script? What is an audience? What do audiences supposed to do, as opposed to players, gamers, rules? And so again, when you cross disciplines, you really need to think about what do these readers know or don't know about my discipline. So again, you want to give them enough information so they can be knowledgeable, be helpful. Another interesting discipline that I just crossed over, again, maybe we're getting to the weeds. I recently spoke at a conference in Montreal, and it was hosted by UCAM. And so more than half the people were Francophones. And the theater scene in Quebec is very different. And so I was writing about playwrights that probably all of you would know, but they really didn't. And so that was a kind of interesting translation about who are these people and why should we care? And so I think the thinking about who the readers are, you can't solve all those problems, but you can be mindful of what those kind of base contexts can be.
And I think knowing, so the idea of an abstract, why do conferences ask people to torture themselves and write an abstract at all? Like, why not just be like, hey, you seem cool, why come on over? I think there are new approaches, different approaches to conferences where, sometimes they're curated, people are invited because of other people already know what they're doing, or maybe they just want to make an invitation to particular community emerging scholars, for example. It's like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, just come. So I think there are different approaches to even thinking about the abstract and its value. But often for large conferences, national, international conferences like CATR and others, the conference committee has only so many spots, there's only so many days, only so much time, and they want to ensure that they can program a really exciting and diverse range of papers that speak to what's happening within the field at that particular moment in time. So the abstract is a tool. And I think if you think of it as a tool and as its own kind of genre, it's a tool that helps the programming committee make decisions and also start to think about the program itself. If they suddenly receive 20 papers that are all about a particular playwright or a particular production or a moment in time, they might think, okay, there's something here. There's this larger movement happening. We need to either respect that, or they might say, we don't have room on our program for 20 papers on this particular playwright. Maybe that's something for future. Maybe we'll look at a different structure. Maybe there's a round table that could be, instead of having 3 people deliver 20 papers, maybe we can invite 5 people to give shorter talks. So at any rate, it gives people the conference program committee well, I don't want to say fast, but perhaps a more accessible way to quickly gauge what's happening and to undertake an assessment process. And that's something we'll maybe talk about a little bit later. And I'm sure Jen and Robin and Roberta and Caitlin, who've been involved in that assessment, can offer more thoughts there. But that's just important to know that that's why it needs to be concise, because people are going to be reading it. They're going to be reading it alongside 50 other paper proposals or more. Sometimes committees are large enough you can break it up into smaller groups, but often they'll be reading a lot of material in a short period of time to make decisions. So respecting the word limits, I think, is important. It shows that you're respecting the time of the committee members as well. Another thing to think about even before you begin writing your abstract is to look at the call for papers, or the CFP. And maybe, would it be okay, Jen, do we want to do a little bit of a analysis?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just find out where it is. There it is. I have this year's CATR. I'm just going to share my screen. This is, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the call for papers that you probably are familiar with, because it's the one for this conference. And we can maybe just look at the important information that's contained within this call, that before you begin writing your abstract, you should read several times so you know what you're preparing for. So I think, so I'll say maybe I'll look at paragraph 1. Janet, if you want to do paragraph 2, maybe we can go like that. Okay. So I think that one of the things that leaps out for me is just the title. Call for session participants, performing shores, the shores of performance. So right there, I know that this is part of the CATR conference for session participants, and there is a theme. It's performing shores. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. It's not just general call, all papers. There is this particular angle or a focus that the programming committee has selected for this year. So when I read on, I'm going to learn a little bit more about how they're thinking about this idea of performing shores. So I'll keep going on. And then I learn first paragraph that it features over 70 sessions. So I was like, oh, this gives me a sense of the scope and the scale, the size of the conference. Like, that's exciting. There's 70 sessions. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to hear different people present their work. And there's but then this next sentence says several of which are seeking interested participants. So that tells me that maybe some of these sessions are closed. They already have participants. So there's still lots of room, but not all of the sessions are open. And then there's more descriptions below to find out instructions. So that's immediately, I'm like, okay, I'm excited, but I better read on because I know it's not entirely open.
Okay, let's keep rolling down. Let's see if we can get one that's a little more detailed. See what else there is. Workshops, seminars.
Of course,
There
that's the call for participants, that sort of the second round, right? After our first round of calls for papers, right? So that's why we know kind of specifically already what we have, including 70 sessions and the roundtables and so on, right? Yeah.
Do one of these down below have a full detailed call that we can unpack? Like one of these?
Well, this is good to know because so just because you may come across it and you may not actually have seen the original one. So if you're just coming into there, you're like, okay, is there an earlier call? Hold on, there must be. It's a conference call for participants. Maybe it's this one. Hold on. Nope.
I'm wondering, Marlise, if you want to go into one of the workshop calls or one of the seminar calls to see.
Okay.
Or the roundtable call. Do you want to pull up one of those?
Sure, I'll do that. Okay, but I think before that, just a couple of other details. Like just in this one, for example, it says we cannot guarantee individuals can be scheduled in more than 2 or 3 sessions. So that's some other information just to know around what the conference can and cannot offer, and then just to help prepare you for that, for maybe having to make some difficult choices if you're offered multiple places. All right, oh, maybe these are not clicking because it's all. Sorry, I should have tested this out before. Clearly trying to work a little too quickly. Let's see what this does. Okay, so this is a, do you want to, okay, want to look at that?
Sure. Let's look at this one on puppets. So thank you for making it larger. Okay, great. So what we have here is, again, a call for abstracts. Let me just scroll down, Marlise, to see what they're asking for at the bottom. Let me see. Possible topics could include. Okay, I'm just gonna see where we're going here. Wonderful. Okay, so the conference organizers, in this case, the panel organizers, are trying to give you some clues, right? And you're looking to see if, do I fit? Am I in line with the kinds of things that they're interested in? So this is really, really useful. So we have a first paragraph. They're giving some background. I think, let's look at the second paragraph. Scroll down. Great, perfect. Scholars and scholar practitioners who seek to theorize the form and practice of puppetry. Okay, so again, giving you some clues. There's some keywords: form and practice. And I love this, from within. So again, that's giving you a hook of like, what are we talking about? Talking about here, make space for practitioners, making space for getting inside and underneath the form. And then they're giving some suggestions. Contributions could be in dialogue with, and then they're listing some theoretical frames, phenomenology, new materialism, or thing theory. So again, you want to position your work, assuming it fits, in one or more of these categories and say, this is how I'm working with thing theory. This is how this relates. You're going to make those, you're going to lock your abstract to these key ideas. Could also engage with, and again, opens another door for you as the writer, with Indigenous understandings of material and embodied being in relation. Again, and then this one interestingly says the aim of the panel, however, is not to do certain things. So again, really you want to be very, very mindful of these instructions, right? The organizers are trying to be helpful. They're trying to give you some hooks to grab onto. They're also trying to maintain expectations, because they want to bring together a group of people who have some things in common, who want to work who want to work together. And again, they've left us at the end. I love this with a question. Listening to puppeteers, scholars of puppetry, and the puppets themselves, what new insights could emerge? So again, you're being asked to speak to emerging insights. Again, you're being given a phrase to grab onto, grab it. And then very typically here, possible topics could include, and I've seen CATR do this in the past with something like performing shores, where there's a gloss on the word shores. Shores could mean this, shores could mean this, shores could mean this, shores could mean this. And there are lots of different ways to grab on. And they're doing the same thing here. They're giving you kind of a bullet point list of what you, where this is going to go, and things to, and again, things you can fit with. Again, please submit an abstract, 250 words. They're very clear about what this is, and 100 word bio. So in this case, the organizers are also interested in who you are and in your experience. Do you want to add to that, Marlies?
I think the only thing I would say that you did a really brilliant, I think, little analysis of this particular call is that is the emphasis on possible and the emphasis on could. So as Jen has said, they're opening up doors. But if you look down this list and you're like, oh, but I'm really interested in puppet performance as it relates to disability, and I don't see disability listed here, does that mean that there isn't a place for me? And the answer, of course, is no. I mean, if you're unsure, you could just email Dawn and Gabe and ask, is this okay? They'd probably say yes, absolutely. But this is just, again, it's a framework, it's an invitation to submit your ideas. And the hope is that you will actually bring something maybe that challenges or opens up what the conveners, the organizers of this particular session have even imagined. But as Jen has said, it is important to keep within the sort of the scope of what they're imagining, because if it's so far, if you're like, oh, well, I want to talk about this, but not in any of the ways that you've engaged with, and I'm not actually interested in any of this theory, then they might find it more difficult to see how to bring that paper into that particular session. There might be a different session that is a better fit for that particular focus.
Yeah, and I will say it might be a better session. It might not be a good fit for you. They're also trying to communicate, do you want to be here? Yeah. Because again, you want to be in conversation with other scholars and other papers that are related to your interests. And it may be the case that if this doesn't speak to you or to your research, maybe you are better off placing that paper somewhere else. So yes, I would recommend people be alert to those kind of cues that people are sending you. Yeah. Question for you, Marlies. What do you think about emailing the conveners?
Well, I think it depends. If it's something like if it's just for a general conference and you're like, does this topic make sense to somebody like like Robin as the president of CATR, or Roberta and Kaylin as the conveners of the huge conference? It might be challenging because they might they're dealing with so many other pieces. It may also put them on the spot if they say yes and then the programming committee says no. So it's if you're asking for somebody to say yes, no, little challenging, but maybe I'll leave it to Robin and Roberta and Kaylin and others to comment on that. But if it's for very specific, like it's a working group, there's a sense that it's going to be they're looking for papers in earlier stages of development, that the expectation is that it's not a polished, perfect piece of research, then I think it would be completely fine to say, hi, I'm really excited by this call. I was just wondering, does this seem to fit within the parameters? And usually I think people will be more than happy, because you want to create that kind of welcoming environment for your particular session. It really benefits the organizers if they can respond in a timely manner. And they may also say, have some advice for how to shape the abstract so that it can adjust. But I think every group is different. So
yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a good take on, to be sensitive maybe to the scale. If this is a huge conference, maybe not email the whole conference conveners. If it's a little group like this, maybe you do email Dawn and Gabe and say, I have a question. What do you think about this? Is this going to work?
Great. All right. So next on our agenda, so we talked a little bit about this already. Who reviews the abstracts and how does the review work? So maybe we can talk a little bit more deeply about what happens when your paper, when you send it off, you're like, oh no, the deadline has come. I better get it in. Maybe before then, the question about deadlines. Now, I know I try to make all my deadlines for conference abstracts, but sometimes life happens. You may not get it in on time. I would always write to ask if you can submit it late, or just submit it. You never know. Often conferences, they are like, oh, the first round we actually didn't get as many submissions as we'd hope. And so you might see the posting again, an extended deadline, because it's to everybody's benefit to have a really, fulsome group of submissions to look at, a really great group of submissions. But if you're in the position of like, oh, my dog just died and I've got 5 assignments due for school, you might just ask, can I have, is it okay if I submit it tomorrow or like early next week? I'm really, really keen to be part of this. And I don't think any harm can come from that. If you submit it 2 weeks late without having any prior conversation and assume that it'll be accepted, I think that's a different situation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Always ask. Always ask. And then extended deadline is like the ultimate academic cliche. The deadline is always being extended. So I wouldn't count on that, but very likely. Maybe this is a place just to say something really, really pedantic, but I think really important. Follow the instructions on the abstract, on the call. If it says 250 words, 250 words. If it says include a bio, include a bio. If it says don't include a bio, don't include a bio. If it wants it in Word, then do it in Word. If they want PDF, then send it in PDF. Like these instructions, I know they're really extremely boring and really sometimes can be really field controlling. Please follow the instructions, because again, the conveners are receiving sometimes hundreds, and then need to be, these things need to be packaged, they need to be alphabetized, they need to be sorted or anonymized or whatever needs to be done to them. Don't make people's lives difficult. So yeah, please just like whatever the basic instructions are, please follow the instructions. Job one.
Yeah, no, that's a just people be grateful for that, and which is not to say if you realized, oh no, my abstract is 352 words and they ask for 350, I'm gonna be excluded immediately. It's not like that at all. It's more, if they give a ballpark range, if it's 250 to 300, 350 to 500, whatever that is, then aim to be as close as possible to that as possible. Sometimes
and make people's lives easy.
Yeah. And sometimes with certain, I think I had this most recently with Aster, they're using some different software for people now go and upload your abstract. And if your abstract is over by a certain amount, you actually won't be able to fit it all in. So it's not even just about being courteous to others. It's actually like, oh no, my last, yeah. So that's just,
or it might just cut off. Like you might think you're writing 1,000 words in there and it'll cut off at 250. Sometimes the software does that.
You're like, oh no, I didn't even get to my questions. So do we want to go to the next question then, Jen? Like how does the review process work?
Review processes. Yeah. So, okay, maybe I'll just jump in here. I've been part of some different review processes, and there are some different theories of how this might work. So the first one, I think we've already touched on a little bit, which is whether the papers have been anonymized or not. So again, something to be aware of. And sometimes where the situation is where a bio is requested, again, as Marlise already said, the rationale is, again, thinking about diversity, thinking about people from a range of different career stages, people from a range of different niches and aspects of the discipline, geographical diversity, all the different reasons. So the bio will be used to speak to some of those qualities. Sometimes they are anonymized. Maybe I'll talk about a large conference where things are being read by committee. So again, typically, I don't know how big the program committee is this year at CATR, but my experience in the past has been 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 people, sometimes more. Yeah, 8. And then what happens is the abstracts are all bundled together and circulated. And then the committee will come up with a rubric and with a ranking system. So again, each person in the committee is going to read all the abstracts. And again, they're reading many, and then usually saying like, I don't know, it could be like a 5-point ranking system. This one's a 5, 5, 5, a 4, 4, 4, 3, and they're ranking them. I have been on committees where some people started to do decimal points and get creative with the rankings. I've also been on committees where we said 5-point system, and one person was like 5, 3, or 1. That's it. 5, 3, or 1. And so then those are all ranked. People do take liberties with the ranking system, in my experience. And then then everyone gets an average score. And then again, all the papers then resorted by their scores. And then the ones above a certain number, the committee will say, do we all agree that the ones above this certain number are to be accepted? And there might be discussion if there's anomalies. If you get a paper that got lots of 5s and then lots of 1s, there might be a discussion because the committee split. You might have to think, why did some people love it? Why did some people have concerns? We might have a debate about that. All the papers above a certain number get accepted. And then the committee might go through a gray zone. All the ones between here and here, let's talk about what's in this zone. Which, how many more spaces do we have? Can we move these up? And then also typically the committee has a discussion about all the ones that are under the cutoff. Because someone might say, this paper, I thought it was fantastic. Let's talk about why other people didn't see that. And kind of like, see if there's room to move somebody up. So yes, the scores are useful, but in my experience, it's not the be all and the end all. It's a way to start a conversation when you have 75 abstracts in a committee of 8 people. So that's sort of where, that's a system that I've been pretty familiar with. And maybe the other thing to talk about, and I don't know, you might want to pick this up, Marlise, I won't go on about this now, which is, there's 2 organizers, like the puppet theory we just saw. There's 2 people and they're going to get 12. And their process might be a lot more informal. They might not go through a formal ranking system. They might have a discussion, meet, talk through what they've got, and make some decisions there. So it's not always quite so structured.
Yeah, and I think a couple important things to emphasize just from what Jen has said is that, first of all, this is a subjective process. I think that a committee always goes into this with the best of intentions and with an effort to be as fair and balanced as possible. That's why having something like a rubric where you say, okay, well, we're going to be looking at, the quality of the writing, do the proposal speak to the conference theme in some way, like whatever the rubric is, and maybe we can hear a little bit more if this year's committee wishes to share. But that's important so that everybody at least is starting from a sense of like, these are our priorities. And it's not just like, well, I like this person's paper better because this resonates with my political views. It's not at all about that. It's like, what are we're trying to be as objective and balanced and as possible, while of course realizing that subjective experiences comes into play as well. Preferences in terms of writing style, preferences in terms of, what questions that people might consider important or necessary, all of that. And that's why it's really helpful when you have a committee the size of like this year, 8 people, you're going to get a nice diversity of perspective. And that, I think it sounds like the committee is also not just a whole bunch of scholars from one area or one region or one career stage, but looking at the diversity within the programming committee as well. I think that's really commendable. I don't know, Rupert, if you wanted, or Robin or Kaylin, if there's anything you want to add at this point about that, the constitution of the programming committee.
Well, I think, that exactly what you just said was definitely a goal that Robin, for example, who I think is the most experienced programming committee member and setter-upper on probably CATR right now, possibly along with Jen, folks who have done a lot of programming committees, that was one of your key pieces of advice when we were setting it up this year, Robin, was to make sure that we had that diversity of voices, people from different fields, people from different parts of the country, people from different career stages. So we, for example, we had, folks who were currently in graduate programs. We had folks who had just recently gone into a postdoc. We had folks who were at precariously employed, folks who were at different career stages. And I think that's, as Jen said, definitely an important part of the conversation, because you get people with different levels of being steeped in the, I personally always think like the most up-to-date people are the PhD students and postdocs who have just like really been digging deep into what's fresh and new. And they I think often have the best insights into like, this is really exciting new work. So yeah, I think, and then of course, as many forms of diversity as possible, as many different lived experiences that people are bringing, is my sense. Robin or Kaylin, would you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. And one thing I'll just add, that conversation that we had early on was that we wanted to be really inclusive, even both in terms of wide variety of presenters and participants at different stages, but also that the abstracts did not need to speak to the theme of the conference. And that was something that you'll see reflected in the larger CFP that we talked about beforehand, which isn't always the case. So I would just say too that that language was consciously put in there.
Yeah, I'll add to that. That's really been, I think, something that maybe makes CATR a little bit unique, where as an association every year, pretty much every year in the 23 years that I've been here, pretty much every call for papers has said, here's kind of a very general theme that we're working in, but you don't have to address it for our call for papers, right? And in part, that's really coming from a philosophy, I think, of course, we want the best scholarship to be represented here. But this is also like once a year when colleagues can come and meet and share their ideas. And especially in the pre-Zoom days, it was really kind of the best way to do that, you know, unless you're doing like a conference call or Skype. So that I think is really key. Like it's a time for scholars to get together, and something brand new might emerge out of a conference that people didn't know when they got on the airplane or started driving out. So and also I've always been a really big advocate as a general member on some of the programming committees I was on, you know, some time ago. I've always been a big advocate of like the outlier idea, you know, like somebody pitches something in an abstract that has pretty much nothing to do with anything else. Surely it's drama, theater, performance studies in some way, but it doesn't obviously fit with, you know, two others that we can put on a panel or something, right? It's kind of a one of a kind. And I always like that. I think that's something that CATR has been quite good at bringing in. So if you've got a strong abstract, a really interesting topic, and maybe it doesn't really look exactly like other people's, we're going to look at that seriously. And I think we always have. And I think that's really kind of a strength. You know, and then it falls to me or someone else to then put you on a panel with with a couple of papers that are maybe more alike, and then you feel like a bit of an outlier and people talk about that. But at the end of the day, people got to hear, you know, what you had to say. And you can talk about maybe how it didn't quite fit in, but I kind of like that. Like, no, I didn't fit in. It's new. It's different. It's something else, right? I think that's pretty exciting too.
I think this is a really important point, and that's one of the things about that we all love about CATR. It's like there's a theme or not.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody welcome, which is great. I think that's I think it's good that CATR that's part of our ethos, and we say that in the call. But then there are some conferences where it's like, this is the call.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, especially like smaller, I'm thinking of like symposia more than conferences, where it's like, these 12 people are going to get together and discuss this really niche topic for 2 days. Then you want to be really in. And sometimes, like we said, like workshops or calls for panelists, then you really want to be tight. So I think it's good this is a great conversation to have, because you want to be sensitive to like, am I here or am I here? And then you are reading the tea leaves in the call for papers, and figure out how you fit in.
I wonder, we've talked a little bit about what the abstract is. I wonder if it might be helpful. I'm just looking at this other slide from Natalie and Rick's presentation. If we could just talk about, they have identified it as 3 moves of the conference abstract. So maybe I'll just share this slide briefly, and we can kind of talk through these 3 moves, and maybe there are more moves. It's a whole choreography, who knows? But this is not my slide. It's courtesy of Rick Knowles and Natalie Alvarez. I'll just start the slideshow. All right, this is one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here we go. The 3 moves of the conference abstract. So they've identified the problems and the stakes. What have you done and why does it matter? The methodology. How did you undertake this analysis and why? Where are you situated in relation to this object of analysis? And then 3rd, what's your argument? The structure of your paper will be determined by the stages of your argument. So I think this is a helpful these helpful guidelines to think about when you're trying to get all of your amazing dissertation ideas into 250 words, or maybe it's a book chapter and you're like, oh my gosh, how can I say what I need to say in 250 words? Or maybe you haven't even begun. You're like, I don't know. I don't know. So in some cases you might have a really so many ideas about the problem and the stakes, and it's takes 5 pages to write about it in your chapter. In other cases, you're like, I'm just beginning. I have yet to identify. But in some cases, what's wonderful about an abstract is that it is a preliminary. It's like a proposal. You are sharing ideas that you are hoping to explore in more depth and more detail in the conference paper. So, but being really clear about what do you see now as the problem and what are the stakes. Jen, do you want to talk next about methodology?
Yeah, do you want to hang on to this for a second?
Sure, yeah.
I really love what they've done here, and this makes a lot of sense to me. I also have a little bit of a mental structure when I'm thinking about abstracts, and I didn't make this up. I use a model called ICE, Ideas, Connections, Extensions. And so I think this broadly maps, and you want to begin ideas. Again, this is context, this is background, this might be a description of the object of study. So ideas, foundational facts, sketch the territory, connections. How does this relate to something else? Who am I in conversation with? This thing connects to this, connects to somebody else's idea, connects to something I've done before, or this object of study connects to this methodology or this theory. And then for me, extensions is the so what. Why does this matter? Who cares? Where is this going? And my general advice to students, if I'm coaching abstracts, is that a little bit of I, lots of C, little bit of E. Extensions are just that launching point, but really the meat of it is in the connections. Show me how you're assembling these things and building relationships. But the I sets the stage. This is the play I'm talking about. This is that historical moment. This is the thing I'm responding to. Here's the part that I bring to it. Here's how I'm manipulating it. And then conclude with the so what, who cares? And sometimes so what, who cares is, I think you and I were talking about this, Marlise, before we started. Sometimes I've already written the paper, so I know what the so what, who cares is. And sometimes I have not yet written the paper. And so that might be more speculative. This is a question I'm going to answer, which I have not yet answered. This is where I think I'm probably going, but might not be definitive. And sometimes conference abstracts are not yet the final word on the paper. They're a glimmer of where I think this is going to, or I think this is going to go. So I think ICE maps onto what Rick and Natalie have here, but that's kind of my little catchphrase.
Sorry, I've since I've shared the slide, I'm like, where did I go? Thanks, Jen. No, I think that's another interesting way of breaking it down. The ideas, connections, extensions, and connections can also perhaps be part of this methodology. What are the larger conversations? How are you situated within this object of analysis? What are other methods? Sometimes I can see sort of sometimes people get very bogged down around methodology. They're explaining all of the methods that they're using, and that can become the substance of the abstract. So it's important to remember that this is just part of it, and that, really identifying the problem, how you're going to undertake the analysis, and then ultimately why it's important. That's the thing you really want to leave your readers with. They're like, oh, okay, so nobody's written about this particular performance, or everybody's written about this particular performance, but they haven't applied this particular theoretical lens, or they haven't come at it with this methodological perspective. So what that's doing is allowing you now to argue for a new interpretation of this performance, event, play, collective, organizational model, what have you. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
One kind of hack that I think sometimes my students or sometimes emerging scholars are not familiar with is when you're kind of laying out the who else am I talking to and who else is in this conversation, being able to make a statement about the field, and then in brackets list 3 important scholars: Burio, comma, Bishop, comma, White, close bracket. Then you've already just said who you're talking to. You've already given kind of a quick lit review, very, very brief, without quoting any of those people at length. And then you're going to unpack it, and we're excited. And you're going to say, who is Bishop? Who is Burio? Who is White? What does this got to do with anything? But it's a quick way to say, this is where I'm at. These are in general, this is the field. And I think that's a really helpful kind of strategy, is kind of like a little hook.
The flip side of that, and to play devil's advocate just for a moment, I would say I have also seen abstracts where somebody has felt the obligation to acknowledge and situate themselves so deeply that they have 9 references to other people, they have 2 quotes from other theorists, and so trying to find what's new or exciting and what's them is really difficult.
Yeah,
so I really like the hack you suggest, Jen, but I'd say if you push it too far, if it's like every single sentence has three other scholars, it's going to look as though you don't have your own ideas, when clearly you do. You have your own ideas. So I think you can also use the abstract to confidently, assert yourself within this. You're like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And yes, I'm part of these other scholars, but my argument is advancing these conversations in a new way.
Yeah, agree 100%. This is a mini lit review. Sentence 2. Tell me who else you're talking to. Move on. I agree. It's really important that you shine and your ideas. You don't have room for quotes in 250 words, unless that quote is the thing that you are responding to. Unless that's the thing that the paper is about ultimately. But you got to get in. You got to get out quick.
Yeah. What would you say, Jen, to when you're talking to students and they're like, well, I don't know what my argument is because I haven't done the research yet. I just want to go to the conference because that's going to allow me to apply for funds to, so I can actually do the research. So what do you say what do you do if you're like, I haven't figured out the argument yet?
Yeah, I think you have to know enough to know that the question you're asking is going to yield something interesting. If I take this and I read it through this lens, what insights will it reveal? And you can suggest what the work is that you're going to do and how you're going to do the analysis. And I think you have to hint at where you think it's probably going. It can't just be like, well, we'll see. It has to be a little bit more specific than that. Yeah, I should find some examples of where I've done that. I'm like, I think it's going to be this. I think you have to say, I know that this plus this is going to reveal something of interest at the very least.
Yeah, and I think this is where like this, scientific language of hypothesis. My hypothesize this, that you're hoping to actually demonstrate that through the analysis, but you perhaps haven't yet had.
Yeah. You don't need to say, and I have revealed, and I have come up with these 3 points. These are my 3, you don't have to say these are the 3 answers or these are the 3 observations, but you need to say, I know if I put these 2 things together, something here is going to emerge.
Can I jump in for a moment?
Yeah,
sure.
Just on this topic of argument, because actually, I think one reason that we wanted this session to exist this year was, in fact, from a comment made on the programming committee by someone who, like a emerging scholar who who said, I think we were looking at a particular proposal and we couldn't find the argument.
Hmm.
I'm trying to be obviously vague and fair here. I'm not going to name any names in this. But we're trying to find the argument. And then the comment was made, well, does an abstract have to have an argument? And it's actually, I believe that's what started the conversation about maybe we should have a workshop on writing abstracts, because it's actually a good question. And as I recall, and I don't actually remember the exact one anyway, so there's no way that I'm going to give anything away here, but it was more like a premise. I think I might have said it's more like a premise here. Like, this is an attempt to do something or to show, maybe it was something like, speak about a performance that they were involved in, last summer or something like that. And that sort of opened up this conversation about, well, it depends too. So maybe it's not, it depends where this paper is going to be situated in the span of the project, right? So it might be so new that the project is just getting started. It's a new idea, trying something out, in which case that's when you want to show, as you were saying, like, how does this connect to other thoughts that are out there already, but I'm going to try this based on, I'm going to talk about this show or this text or something. Yeah. Right. Or it could be kind of the other end of it, right? Like, the project is near completion. There's already been maybe a journal article out of it. This is like just wrapping it up or pitching the book that's about to come out in a few months or something like that, right? So, and it can be anywhere in between. It's like a few months in, a couple of years into the project, and so on. And that will often determine the tightness or the rigor of the argument, like what is actually possible there, because it's still, we're all here asking questions. Our research is about trying something out, asking questions, trying to come up with something on the other end. And I think that's true. So I feel like I've often kind of said, where's the argument? No, okay, in the past, like, oh, maybe we should just jettison this. But I think I've kind of opened up more in my own kind of journey on this to think, well, maybe this is actually going to be a really fascinating paper of interest to a wide range of people, but it's not really about a tight thesis statement at this point in the project.
I'm going to do something really possibly embarrassing. Can I share my screen? I pulled up an abstract that I just wrote.
I think you should be able to share it, Jen.
Cool. Okay, how's that? Can everyone see that? I can't see it very well, but.
Yep.
Okay. Nobody cares about this, but the interesting part, I think, is the last sentence. Because this is not actually anywhere near what I ended up talking about as a conclusion. When I wrote this, I didn't know what the answer was. This analysis, by describing the various ways that theater at home embraced dramaturgical qualities of pandemic domesticity, this analysis will reveal how those productions used those affordances to create meaning. That was it. I'm going to do this plus this, create meaning. Ultimately, what? The paper ended up being about thresholds and about what the borders were of public and private and domestic versus the world. I didn't know that when I wrote this abstract. I knew that if I put these two things together, something interesting might possibly emerge. And I think for a committee, that's probably enough. Say, oh, yeah, we see where this is going. It's got some potential. Seems interesting. But yeah, I didn't actually have my 3 arguments here. And I also noticed I didn't even list which plays I was going to talk about because I hadn't yet decided. There was a corpus of things that would be suitable. What would they be?
I think that's really interesting, Jen, and thanks for the vulnerability of sharing. I also was looking at what I'm like, I think what's interesting though is that clearly in that, I don't know when you submitted that, but there's a sense of like a zeitgeistiness sometimes too with conference abstracts that you're working it out. I would say now, 2023, there has been a lot more that's been written and published and other conversations. So I think that's, whoever is preparing, it's important to be aware, and to go back to that second point about where are you situating your work? What are the conversations? If you're the first person to be like, nobody's talked about theater during the pandemic, and that's what my paper's about, I think you'll have a lot of conference programming committees going like, really? Are you sure? I'm not so convinced about that. But the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really worth emphasizing is that where you ended up is not where you started, and so the abstract is just that. It's just a starting point, And the understanding, the hope, expectation is that the final paper will be more, more ideally more developed, more refined, more
Yeah,
sophisticated.
more details, more details.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's also important not to have that expectation. What do you think of for in the case of somebody who proposes an abstract, is accepted to a conference, and then is like, oh, I said I was going to argue this, but actually I can't, or actually the evidence does not hold. What do you do in that situation?
Well, again, like another academic cliche is, my paper title has changed. Like, again, every conference ever. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think you can't arrive at a conference with something completely different than you proposed. That would be, no fair. But I do think you have to recognize that, this is where I started. And I said I was going to put this together with this methodology. And actually what turned out was not what I expected, which is, I love not what I expected, because not what I expected is always cool. Or I thought it was going to be this, and that didn't turn out to be interesting, or that didn't turn out to be true. I thought this person was something, or someone had been somewhere, but actually no, further investigation shows no. I'm generally okay with that. I think you should probably own that. I love papers that tell the story of how I got to X, Y, Z. I thought I was doing this, but then this happened and then that happened. Yeah, I think as long as you kind of explain and are and it's kind of, let's say, fair play, I think that's all. I think that's all right, because you don't want to take advantage of the acceptance and then produce something completely different. But I think generally you've got lots of latitude to do what we do, which is research, and allow the question to turn out in some unusual way. That'd be my sense of it. I've never seen someone come in with something completely different, totally 100% different. I've seen people kind of like, I'm going over here.
Yeah, I think I've observed like maybe one was like, that's not what I was involved in the programming community, and I sat in and watched the paper, and I was like, that's a different bird entirely. But what I wanted to say about that was that programming committees, I think, talk a lot about like, is this reading the abstract, is this something that we think the author is going to be able to follow through with? Like, we talk about that a lot, and it doesn't mean we always get our answer right. Like maybe we think no and they would have, or we think yes and they didn't. But we are also thinking about, so there's got to be something, I think, convincing in that abstract to show, like, to prevent what we just described here, right? That, give us confidence that what you're proposing is something that you're able to find the research for, the material for, that you'll be able to work through, even those 300 words, right? Something, there you go. Yeah, feasibility, as Kaylin said, right? In those 300 words, we have to believe that you're the person to write this and to come up with what you're attempting. It doesn't have to be exact, as you've just said, it doesn't have to be exactly what we were expecting, but there's got to be a feeling here that you're not going to spontaneously combust in 3 months and disappear, and you're not going to be able to do it because maybe somebody else could have had that spot or something in some occasions. So yeah,
feasibility is a good one. I mean, in terms of open-endedness, one thing that I think about when I'm reading abstracts for a conference, I think, do I want to hear more? You've got me to this point, and I look forward to hearing what you discover. Like, it's just bringing me along to know that the next thing is just over the horizon, and that I'm engaged in hearing the next piece. I'm good with that kind of open-ended adventure.
I think one of the challenges too in writing, just thinking from the perspective of Canadian theater and performance historian, writing for a more general audience, and I think we're all, CATR, it's such an interdisciplinary group of scholars. We're all writing generally about theater and performance, but sometimes in very different ways. So sometimes I feel like, oh, there's so much I need to do to contextualize before I can even present research questions, or venture to, squeeze in some kind of preliminary thesis or statement in my abstract. And so that's something that I've struggled with over time. Like, how much context do I need to include so that people actually get this weird, obscure performance that I'm talking about from 1760? Like, who cares about this too? So trying to then identify, okay, like what is the hook like what's the larger question that will cue to the committee that the questions I'm asking are not just relevant for me and maybe two other people, but there's a larger conversation that this is part of. And hopefully, if you're riffing on the conference theme, or you're aware of a more general, like in the case of the conference paper I'll be giving on this very somewhat obscure 1764 play called The Lecture on Heads, it's about thinking about empire and thinking about performance, the migration of performance and the role of empire. And I'm also writing about it in Halifax. So that was like, oh, I'm going to Halifax and I want to write about Halifax. So I was like, oh, I hope the committee likes that. So I was trying to just give, a wider scope to kind of explain why, for me, this is part of these larger conversations, and then maybe throw a little carrot, like, hey, and it's about the city where we'll be. But again, I know sometimes I've struggled with that as a historian, to kind of justify, like, this is important because it's history. That's important. But you don't necessarily have to work that hard. I'm like, no, just what is the broader theoretical, methodological conversation that you're part of?
Yeah, I'm looking at the time, and maybe I just want to give some space for other people to jump in as well. But one thing I wanted to just say before I cede the floor is maybe relates to this question that you're talking about, Marlise, but sort of my pet peeve is too strong. But one thing that I see in abstracts that I would, it's a hole that people fall in, I think, is that dilation between too specific to too general. And so sometimes 250 words, people are sometimes, it's probably fear of like getting down to brass tacks. What is this really about? And so sometimes you get abstracts that end up like circling 30,000 feet in the air. And I'm like, what is this about specifically? And you kind of get lost in kind of a cloud of big ideas. They're ideas that are maybe too big, or sometimes too jargony to really say, what is this about specifically? So my main piece of advice for writing abstracts, all like including everything we've just said, but really be clear, be plain, own that idea, get excited about it, be eager, but be plain. Just tell me what it's about in the most direct language that you can imagine. I know that feels really like you're exposing yourself by saying it directly, as opposed to cloaking it in all kinds of academic language. The more direct someone can be, the more engaged your readership is going to be, especially if you do have a diversity of readers who don't all know all the details, who are not all up to speed on the latest thing in your very narrow discipline. So again, to your point, Marlise, like the big so what? I might not know anything about 18th century performance, but I know something about empire. Broadly, I can think about what the larger stakes are. But also just tell me directly why this is important and why you care about it. Because yeah, you do about 250 words to attract the reader's attention, to attract their engagement, to say, yeah, I kind of understand where you're going. I'd love to hear more. So I just think that's so important. And I think it's something that we just struggle with because it's hard. That's the hard part. That's the hard part of really getting your ideas out in a really kind of clear, concise, plain way. Okay, great. I see Kaylin and Katrina. Kaylin.
Hi, thank you. To sort of piggyback on Robin's question about argument, something else that came out of our conversation when we were reviewing the abstracts for CATR this year, and it was the question of writing an abstract for a performance piece or for a paper that was going to describe a creation process. So can you offer any piece of advice for someone writing an abstract about a performance that they'll do, or maybe a performance that they've done?
That's a good question. I don't know, Marlise, do you want to tackle that?
Sure. I mean, I think in some cases it is somewhat similar. You're like, what you need to talk about what it is. why it's important. If you're engaging in, I don't know, like a site-specific performance piece, and you want to think about shore and ocean, and you're taking people to the beach, then you want to be able to talk about like what that is. You want to be able to talk about if there are other artists, or maybe you're also an artist scholar, so you're thinking theoretically as well about your performance practice. So I think it would be important to indicate what those, you know, their interlocutors are. And then I think, again, like, what is it that you hope to achieve from your performance piece? What do you hope that your audience or participants will experience? So I think again, the structure that Rick and Natalie laid out there, I think you could adjust to think more artistically, but I think it still holds. Or Jen's ideas, connections, extensions, like what is the idea of the workshop or the performance piece? How does it connect to your wider body of work or other artists' body of work? And then how are you hoping then to extend that? What's important? Is it about the audience's experience? Is it about your own artistic development? What is significant about this? And why do you need it to happen as part of that conversation? So that'd be something I'd offer.
Yeah, I would agree generally. I think broadly these things should be more or less the same, at least structurally. And I think for me, the key is to move beyond ideas, to move beyond just describing the thing, to saying, how does it work and why does it matter?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's important, that maybe that's another kind of takeaway. The abstract needs to be more than merely descriptive. Yeah, exactly. It's not just, I need to know, again, in this context, I need to know why it matters. Katrina. Hi.
Hi there. Thank you for this great session. You touched a little bit on noting other authors within the body of the abstract, and your opinion on whether citations were appropriate for abstracts, and if the answer is yes, how many is too many?
This could be controversial. My sense is yes. Almost always I write abstracts that include works cited. I've never thought about a limit, but like 5 to 7, a few. I mean, if you're starting into a lengthy bibliography, then maybe it's excessive. Really what you want to do is situate yourself in the conversation, right? So either you're responding to someone directly, this person says this, and here's what I'm going to tackle, in which case you might only have one citation. It might just be like, this person says this. You know, I kind of gave that example of like 3 people in brackets. It's a sense of the landscape. It's to be like, I know what's going on here broadly. And then you might want to be choosy about who you pick, because it might not be like everybody in the field of participatory theater, but it might be like these people who identify the problem of neoliberal labor in the context of participatory theater. Like, do you see what I mean? You want to kind of hook into sometimes a more narrow argument. I think you need to be pretty selective. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this subject.
I just mentioned that this is not a SSHRC application. I think for SSHRC, there's a particular performance of your knowledge of the field that is incredibly important. So there I would say there's almost like there's no limit, like just get as many citations as possible within the word limit of a SSHRC application at both the doctoral and then the beyond the doctoral level. That's really important. I think for an abstract, if your citation is like a page that's way too long, I'd say like my rule of thumb would be like 3 max. But 1 is probably better. You know, like that would be, because then again, it's like pulling attention away from your ideas towards this larger, you know. So I think, but again, I really like Jen's idea of like the little like here's the, if you're situating the problem or identifying the problem, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about blah 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 and blah 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 and blah 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 and blah blah blah. You know, you could have 3 or 2 and 2. However, nobody has yet brought together the conversation in this way, which is what I'm going to do in my paper. So then it's just like check and on to your ideas. But to answer the question about do you include a works cited, yes, absolutely. And that is echoed by Rick and Natalie. That was one of their things. They say if you need to cite, follow MLA guidelines or Chicago with footnotes.
Yeah, I like what you said, Marlies. Like check. I like that as kind of yep, check in here, and this is me. Like
There-
that as kind of an approach.
If I can maybe respond too, there may be, if you're submitting your abstract through like a software form or something, and there may not be space for the word count of works cited that that would clear you from the legal ramifications as you cite in MLA format. I've had to in the past just do more of the drive-by sightings that wouldn't fare well in a dissertation, but it's like discipline analysis, Foucault, like, and then and you kind of the big names, and if you're trying to cite somebody that maybe somebody won't recognize, but it's a really prime quote for what you're trying to do, you do the quote, and then you just may need to weave into the sentence enough information that people can Google it, right? Like in Jones's book titled Flunk, right? She says, quote, and then that should be enough for us to kind of find what you're saying in a way. There just might not be, and maybe with a page number there, and we'll know exactly how to find it, but there just might not be a whole section to set up works cited, enter, right?
And I think sometimes you can actually even see that same practice in calls for papers, right? Like I know we did it this year when we were creating the call for this conference, that we were like, as this very cool scholar who inspired us says, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, obviously we're not going in depth about, we don't have space in the call either to say, we truly understand what this scholar is arguing and we're going to richly unpack it, but we're going to sort of say, this idea is important. And so I think sometimes another thing you can do is kind of check to see how the people who framed the conference were using citations. Yep, there you go. That's exactly the one I was thinking of. To sum up an incredibly complex and profound work, here's a sentence. And then here's another scholar's like one word. That's very important.
Yeah, it is name checking, and it can feel superficial, but I think it's key to be really selective. And that if you are going to put in references, to be really precise about them. Yeah, and I like that strategy with as this person says, in their book of this title, keep going.
Please read the whole book, it's great. But like in this case, for example, we were really wanting to flag the fact that this theme was intended, among other things, as a good site for talking about decolonizing and challenging colonial and imperialist thinking about space and land and relationships. And so, hopefully by mentioning this book, we're flagging that that's something that we hope will be a focus of the conference. And similarly, if people were writing an abstract and citing this, they would be flagging to the committee, oh, I'm going to be talking about this kind of body of theory about how shores relate to decolonial and decolonizing thinking.
Yeah, and I think if you have an abstract length of something like 500, which sometimes you might have, there's a little bit more room to be expansive, to be including more of these sort of references. But if it's 250, it's much. The shortcuts are the way to go. I'm wondering if there's any other questions or advice that anybody would offer from this conversation today.
I do have one, but maybe I don't know if Eugenie or Bridget wanted to add anything.
Bridget, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I totally forgot to say in my introduction that I am a graduate student. And so this has been really helpful. And I know I have a few other friends who are attending the conference, and we were kind of coming together when working on abstracts, either for the roundtables or for the actual papers. And I think you touched on this already a little bit, but kind of like working on adapting a conference proposal specifically from like a paper that you've written for a class. And I think that people who use this resource might also be grad students. So if there's anything else about that, or any personal experience with that. Yeah.
This is a great question, Bridget, and I have a little bit of advice for you, and Marlies may have other ideas, and maybe some others. I think using a paper that you've written for a course and then moving it to either a conference paper or ultimately to a publication is a really great way to, scaffold your thinking. One thing that I think is really important is that when you're in a course, there's a shared body of knowledge in the course. You and the instructor and everybody else in the course is sharing a certain kind of experience, certain vocabulary, as you kind of move through the course. So that's really important when you move from the course out to be mindful of what those shared assumptions are. And to kind of remember that we all haven't been in the course. And so then try to figure out, what does this new audience need to know about your specific contribution? Do you know what I mean? So it can't be just the whole same thing again, but it has to be reframed for a new readership who might need to be introduced to some of the assumptions of the course, or who might be really well versed in some of those, might be already really well versed in some of those scholarly ideas or some of the things that you're thinking about. So I would say, this is always good advice, but be mindful of the audience, right? Because you're gonna need to change the frame to move it forward into a new context. I'll often say to students when they're writing for me, when they're writing the course paper, I'll say, skip ahead. I already know that. We all already know that. Just keep moving. But that's that's the shared assumption of the course. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, a lot.
Yes, very
actually.
much
Thank
so.
you.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Because there's a problem with my Zoom. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jenny. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to thank you, for this insightful presentation. Lots of good ideas, and for me, and it's the way you presented it, and all these details, and the visuals. They were very helpful also to my students. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thanks. Does anyone else want to give advice to Bridget about moving something from a course into a different context?
I wanted to maybe pick up on that a little bit, because it really does have to do with your initial decision about what you want to actually pitch. Like, how do you see it? So you've read the call for papers, and you've got choices here, right? Like, you might want to adapt a paper from a course, and Jen is right. You really have to think about what we don't know that people in the course didn't know. You might want to take part of your dissertation or an article that you're writing, or it might be almost like totally in left field, outside, like an outlier from your own research sometimes, and all of that's fine. But if you choose the outlier, then just know that you'll be spending time with this. And is it going to be time away from writing the dissertation, or time away from coursework or something, right? So those are kind of choices. And sometimes you see a really juicy call for papers, but then you're like, you really have to think, well, this is going to be weeks or months maybe of work to, is that going to be pulling away from what your focus is now, which can be fine, but you do need to take that into consideration. Yeah, that's a bit of advice I'd have for that on that point.
I'd say just to that, if you decide that it is very much in keeping with your dissertation research, bringing it to a conference after a class is a great way of getting new feedback from people who haven't been part of that bubble world of a classroom, who maybe are fresh to the material. So I think it's great to take it into kind of take it around, like, here's my new idea, here's my new project, and especially if you're in the earlier stages of figuring out what it is you want to do with the dissertation, or if you're thinking like, okay, now I've got this conference paper, now maybe where does it go for an article? I think a conference can also be a good launching pad for that. And then the last thing I'll say, just because I know we're getting to right to 5:30, is sometimes with a large project you may have like little tiny pieces of a project. So I mentioned the Lecture on Heads, this play that I'm kind of obsessed with. I've written a lot of different conference papers where I've talked about something connected to it, or or it could be like a particular artist that your entire dissertation is devoted to them, but you write about an aspect, maybe it's a particular play or a particular production of a play. So that's another great way of thinking about the conference paper and what it can do to help push along your overall project. But I also absolutely want to just echo what Robin has said in terms of keeping in mind, is this going to take me down a tangent, and is that tangent one that I can afford to go down right now? All right, so our Zoom room support, thank you so much, Zoom room support, has just let us know that we are at time, but there's no one in the waiting room. So are there any final thoughts, Jen, or anyone else in the room before we close for the day?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us, because I thought it was gonna be like me and Marlies just hanging out. I thought Sunday afternoon, people really want to talk about abstracts. Clearly we do. And then my second thought was we wouldn't have enough to say, and clearly we've got lots to say, many opinions in the room among us all about abstracts. So this was, I hope this will be useful to people who watch it now or later. But yeah, thanks for asking us. It was so fun.
Yeah, and thank you, programming committee. That is huge, important work. And is there anything that anybody who wants to be on future programming committees might keep in mind, Roberta or Kaylin? Is there advice you might have for?
Well, I would just say let CATR know, like if this sounds interesting to you, and don't ever think, oh, it's only these kind of people who are on the programming committee. As we said, like the more perspectives on the programming committee, the better, and the more likely that the conference is to be good and rich. So like, please do let the president of CATR, for example, know that next year you'd like to be on the programming committee.
Yeah, really, from like emerging to emeritus, right? Like anybody who's interested in doing this work next year, for example, just throw me an email and let's talk about it. Yeah, honestly, please.
Yeah, it's great work. It's not hard work. It's really rewarding work. Highly recommend it.
You learn a lot. It's great. It's a great conversation.
Yep.
I think this year it was like the day after New Year's or something like that. So everyone was kind of in that holiday mode. It was great. Just before we close, Marlies and Jan, I just want to thank you so much for doing this. We asked you to do this only a couple weeks ago, and we truly appreciate that you took it on, as you said, on a Sunday afternoon. And I think you've created a really helpful resource for lots of folks to refer to in the future.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for being on, everybody.
Thank you so much. And I know this is going to be so helpful.
All right.
Amazing.
Goodbye.
Thank
See you in
you so
Halifax.
much.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye. Hey, Robin, just before you get off. Oh, no, I just lost him.
You lost him. That was it.
I'll email him. See you soon, Jen.
You, Roberta. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.